Alright, the nostalgia. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play The Adventures of Batman and Robin for the Super Nintendo. I note the difference in which console it's on, as every version of this game is radically different from the next. This one is a beat-em-up closer to the NES game, the Genesis one is a run-and-gun similar to Gunstar Heroes, and the Sega-CD game is just a straight-up driving simulator, effectively. Starting off, let's get into Amused to Death. Master Bruce, we've picked up a suspicious-sounding broadcast. Okay, put it on the monitor.
Hello, this is the Joker channel. And now for an urgent message from the Joker himself. Here he is! Are you watching, Batman? I've prepared some very special attractions at the Gotham City amusement park just for all those good little boys and girls of Gotham City. Tomorrow should be a real scream, if you know what I mean. Well, everyone, thanks for watching the Joker channel. See you next time. Bye. Master Bruce, this is undoubtedly a trap of some kind.
I know, Alfred, but I still have to go. Quickly, prepare the equipment.
Of course, Master Bruce.
So before every stage, we get taken to this equipment screen where you get to customize what you bring in with you into the level. You always have the Batarang and grappling gun, though. Some of these items are required for some levels, other ones are useful at all times, some of them are barely useful at all, like the smoke bombs. But you can bring in whatever you want, and in the case you need an item that you didn't bring in, you can press the start button and head back to the Batcave at any time. Though I believe doing so does either cost a life or send you back to the start of the level, maybe even both. So as I brought up a moment ago, this game is effectively a spiritual successor mechanically to the NES game by Sunsoft for the franchise. When you're not running around and punching grunts, you can select whichever sub-weapon you want to use with the select button. You can use it as many times as you want. For some of them, you have infinite batarangs, but say, the spray gas if you brought it in or the smoke bombs, those are limited, but enemies can drop ammo for that. Throughout the stage are, of course, pickups to either increase your ammo, restore your health. You can jump into enemies to kick them. You can throw batarangs at mooks with guns to make them drop them and stun them completely. It's actually a very effective way to get through stages without getting hit too often. You can also roll under some attacks, but that's only really useful in a couple of cases. You can also just outright do the wall jump from the NES game by jumping towards a wall and then pressing the jump button. And you can chain that pretty much infinitely until you hit the top of the screen.
Hi there, Batman. Welcome to the Joker's Funhouse.
I love this game's soundtrack, by the way. It's largely adaptations of compositions from the animated series from my memory, but what's here that's original is still really good. Be careful with these Joker statues. The moment you get too close, they will rotate and start firing machine gun volleys here and again, but you can just duck kick into their shins and get through them, no problem. So, Batman the Animated Series. I grew up watching it, but as a very little kid, it was probably the DC Animated Universe show I watched the second least, next to Superman the Animated Series. Because when I was very young, what the shows that were actively airing were Static Shock and the Justice League cartoons. But my favorite growing up overall was Batman Beyond. But having watched most of this series over the years since my very young childhood, it is absolutely one of the greatest cartoons ever made. People who say that aren't making that up or being nostalgia blinded. It is just that good. Slightly tricky thing with the grappling hook, by the way. Using it by default without holding a directional input will make it fire diagonally, which allows you to use it to swing across spikes like the one on that previous screen. Holding up at all makes it fire directly upwards, which you can then press the button again to pull yourself upwards. When I first played this game, I thought you had to hold diagonally upwards to use it, so I was constantly misfiring with it. In fact, you even see a little bit of that later on in the LP. For right now, time for the first mini-boss, this toy soldier. You jump on the spear it's trying to stab you with, and then kick it in its face while jumping. With that said, the moment you do that, you want to run away, as it does fire projectiles out of its head that you can then dodge by moving left. This game isn't too hard. It does get relatively tough later on, especially in one stage, but the bosses are pretty easy to figure out, as their patterns are pretty one or two note. I found you, Joker. Surrender quietly.
Don't be silly, Batman! I've prepared some particularly nasty surprises for you. Oh, this machine will give the greatest and last thrill of your life. Harley, if you would do the honors. Wow, way to go, Mr. J.
So the final act of the first stage is an auto-scroller on a roller coaster. What's really tough about this is that you largely can't leave this roller coaster until you can, otherwise you will die. And the moment where you can discern when you can isn't exactly the most clear, otherwise Joker's going to be throwing a lot of bombs at you, which a pretty easy way to get past them is to stay towards the left side of the roller coaster and either jump over them or do jump kicks. Punches if they're coming a little bit medium, and if they're being thrown a little low, just either duck under them or dodge them otherwise. Do not jump onto the roller coaster the Joker is on. He is lateral to us, you will die. In this section, as the bombs are being thrown at you, you really want to, again, discern what you should do based on their height. If they're coming in high or medium, jump kick or punch. If they're coming in low, either dodge them or duck under them. Whenever you go into a loop-de-loop in this section, duck, because those little white circles will hit you and potentially, depending on where you are, knock you off of the roller coaster. And hey, that's an instant kill at that point, and we got limited lives in this thing. There is a password system, but that only exists on normal and easy mode, which we are playing on normal mode. There is a very minor change in the game, depending on the difficulty, but I'll showcase what those are at the end of it. For this thing, jump kick. As Joker throws the bombs, just jump kick to knock them away from you. Don't worry about damaging him. You can't actively hurt him yet, as far as I'm aware. Wait until the proper part of the boss fight begins. So, my experience with this game started via emulators, actively. I think the first time I saw this game get played was actually in the AVGN Batman video, way back when. And even at the time, I thought this looked really neat, and after playing it several times, hey, it's a real neat little game. Probably my second favorite of the classic era Batman games, next to the NES one. Right here is where you actively do have to jump onto this other roller coaster, otherwise the one you're on will collapse into the pit. Your luck has run out, Joker.
Rats, you persistent pest. Say goodbye.
Joker is a very easy boss fight. He'll try to run over the place and throw more bombs at you, but here's the thing. You punch him, he jumps to the other side. You punch him again, he does the same. So just get him into this lock and you're pretty much good. There are still going to be loop-de-loops done along the way, so keep an eye on what's going on around you and get into the crouching position instead, and in that case you might be a little open. But ultimately, this is a very solved boss fight, as most in the game sort of are. There's some that are kind of hard to get around all the same, but a large majority of them, as long as you do one specific action, they're pretty easy to get into a loop. In that regard, it kind of reminds you of certain other Super Nintendo era games. Hello, Mega Man 7. Hello, Mega Man X3. One thing is, a lot of the bosses in this game have a lot of health, to the point of feeling a little too HP spongy to my tastes, but that's just me. Also, worth noting, a good amount of the stages in this game are actively directly based off episodes of the show. Some are a little more literal with the translation than others in that regard, admittedly. But if you're a fan of the cartoon, you're probably going to spot some favorite episodes in here, technically. And that's amused to death. There's a tricky moment there at the end with the roller coaster on the whole, but it's a pretty easy first stage. And here's your password segment. If you've played other Super Nintendo games, this type of password looks very familiar. Hello, Castlevania Dracula X on the Super Nintendo alongside many others. And now we move on to No Green Peace. Okay, Alfred. I'm heading for the forest in the Gotham City suburban district.
The forest?
Recently, there has been an unusual increase in the number of trees in the area. Also, there have been reported sightings of bizarre plant life. If it gets out that this is the work of poison ivy, we'll have a major panic on our hands.
I believe you are correct. Good luck, sir.
So something else this game will do from time to time is limit what you can bring into stages. For this stage itself, all you really need to bring in is the spray gun, though, I will say that. I'm bringing in these extra things because I felt like it, really. You don't really get limited by what you bring in, though. It's not like you'll lose points or uses of the items for later if you bring them into a certain stage. So the reason you want to bring in the spray gun is because it's the only real way to deal with enemies in this stage. As in this stage, you actually can't punch at all. Your main attack is replaced with the Batarang sub-weapon. But these women, we actively can't take out permanently, or at least long enough for you to walk past them without the spray gun. Thankfully, they also drop ammo for it pretty regularly. Otherwise, you're going to need to watch out for the chestnuts dropping down. They can just bonk you on the head and do some damage. And then we're going to have to deal with, plant tentacles. Hit it in the obvious red spot. Takes about 3-4 Batarangs to take out. As long as you stay to the far edge of the screen, this thing won't stand much of a chance against you. Now, I'm going to see if I can actually find a reason for this when I get to the second editing pass. And I'm assuming potentially the main factor here is just time of release, but I've always found it interesting that this game went for the title, The Adventures of Batman and Robin. But at the same time, I guess calling it Batman, the animated series, the game, doesn't exactly roll off the tongue as well. That title was actively used in the cartoon, but only for the latter 20 of its core 80 episodes before the new Batman Adventures kicked in, where they had the different art style and all that for things. The core reason I believe it was probably timing is because I believe this game released towards the tail end of '94, and I believe the second season where the title was actively used was, I think it started like late 93, early 94, and ended, I believe, sometime in 95, I believe, before the network and slight time gap for new Batman Adventures kicked in. This stage also does make pretty heavy use of the grappling hook, and it can be a little awkward to get around, I won't lie. Because of that, as the grappling hook is a little iffy with when it wants to work properly, on top of how far you can actually go from like a standstill jump to the right and left. But thankfully, if you fall down, usually it's not that far back of a backtrack again. You do need to be careful in some sections, though, because if you miss a jump, you're probably going to be over at least a spike pit that'll do damage to you. At worst, a bottomless pit. There's also going to be sections like that, where the trees start tipping over as you're on top of them. And the hitboxes for jumps there has never felt the best. That jump I just did, I have failed several times over the years. Same with this one. Due to this game doing radically different things with very minor mechanic shifts in every stage, though, every stage does feel relatively fresh, but there's also a level to it where you're constantly kind of on your toes, not sure what the game's going to throw at you next. And I also kind of appreciate that, given the range of the rogues gallery you end up tackling in some of these games, especially this one. Mechanic unique to the latter part of the stage here are these vines. When you stand on them, they slowly sink into spiky vines that'll deal damage to you. I have never successfully swung from that grappling hook without getting hit. You can chain grappling hooks, in fact you need to later on in the game in order to finish it. But right there, the space just feels too tight to do that reliably in my experience. Honestly, I'd rather just eat the damage, in most cases anyway. They do continue a little bit of a theme with platforms sinking throughout the rest of the stage, though. And in that regard, the later part of this stage can be a little bit of a beginner's trap because of moments like this. Less so for that specific instance, but there are going to be some where they eventually place spikes beneath the ground as it collapses below you. And if you're not cautiously just tapping the D-pad here and again for a couple seconds at a time, you're probably going to get hit. With that said, who plays a game like that on their first playthrough? Unless it's like a stealth game or things like that. Yeah, this screen in specific is where that can happen a lot. Even outside of the pitfalls, though, this part of the stage can be a little rough as enemies do crowd you in from both sides, so don't feel bad about just spamming your spray gas to use it all. And also, don't underestimate the power, once again, of using your batarangs to stun them, as at that point you can just walk past them anyway. Why are you doing this, Poison Ivy? The human world doesn't understand the feelings of the plant world. So, I'll teach you. Time for the boss fight of this stage, and, well, you ever see Little Shop of Horrors? It's true that destruction of the environment is a tragedy. But it's wrong of you to threaten the human world. I don't care about the human world. It's time for Ivy's own Audrey. This fight's a little rough at first, but there is a bit of a trick to it like the others. The main attack it has is going to be using its plant tentacle to try and whip you a couple times. It does 3 whips in a row, after which it then takes a break, which is the perfect opportunity to hit it. Once you hit it, though, it does move forward and back, which, if you time your damaging to a point where it's in the middle of those whips, will leave you pretty open for attack. Ivy herself can also poke out here and again to shoot an arrow across, but honestly, that's pretty rare in the boss fight overall. Towards the latter part of its pattern does change, though. Instead of whipping 3 times across, it'll now flail its tentacle around and slam it down every here and again. But while it's doing that, it'll fire 2 projectiles out that home in on your general location for when they're fired. So you need to weave back and forth while also avoiding the whip. This is where timing your hits really comes in handy, as if, say, you hit it when it's about to do the whip downwards, you're not really avoiding that. Where you really want to time your attacks for in this phase is right after the tentacle slam, as at that point, it'll move forward while it's firing the projectiles and move back while it's doing that, giving you ample time to dodge those and get out of the way of the next tentacle slam. This is a notable difficulty spike after the Joker fight, though. I wouldn't say it's the hardest boss in the game, but it's definitely one of the longer bosses, albeit, again, bosses in this game just kind of feel like they have way too much HP for their own good. With, like, one very weird exception, albeit I don't mind that exception because, for one thing, it's a faster boss fight, but also that boss fight just sucks normally. Thankfully, this is where the bosses having such clear-cut patterns comes in handy, though, as usually if you do the one thing that they're really susceptible against, they'll lock themselves into their pattern and makes it the boss fights just long and not hard at that point. Although there are times where the bosses can pretty easily slip out of that pattern if you're not being very aggressive about it. Now, like minigames of the era, you do have limited lives in this, on top of limited continues, so if you get a game over in one spot too many times, you're just kind of screwed outside of the password system. But I've heard that you can game that system a little bit by, if you're on the last life of your continue, you can select Return to the Batcave and your continues get refilled for some reason. I'm assuming that's probably an oversight or bug more than an actual, like, cheat code, though. But hey, if you're having trouble, that could come in handy. Largely, though, outside of, like, 2 specific jumps, maybe 2.5 with the grappling swing one, Stage 2 isn't too bad. It's a bit of a step up in difficulty from Stage 1, especially the boss fight here, from the Joker to this. But as long as you're keeping attention to what's going on around you, you should be pretty fine. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in Part 2, we're entering Stage 3 and seeing who we're going after next. See you guys then.